Contrast is one of the most important factors that I work on when editing my photographs because it's a quick and easy way to change the whole look of your photographs. So in this video, I'm going to show you 3 different ways that you could do this. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we're talking about one of the most basic types of adjustments that you can make to a photograph, and that's contrast. Contrast is critical to a photo because when you're changing the contrast in your photograph, you're actually changing a lot of other things at the same time. But before we get started, I should explain that in photography, contrast simply refers to the difference between the darker parts of the photograph versus the brighter parts of the photograph. Now, the first method is something that you're probably already familiar with, and that's the contrast slider inside of Lightroom. And that's how most people apply to a photograph. When you push the slider to the right, Lightroom is going to make the dark parts of the photograph even darker and the bright parts of the photograph even brighter. And using this slider is the easiest way to do this, and it can make a massive difference to your photo. But this is more of an automated approach that doesn't give you a lot of control because it is affecting the highlights and the shadows at the same time. But it's a really good place to start if you haven't experimented with contrast. You just need to be careful with photographs with people, for example, on them, because it can make things such as skin tones look a little unnatural, because contrast, when you raise it, when you increase the contrast, it can also intensify saturation. So you can end up with some funky orange looking skin. So it's just something to be aware of. Now, if you really want to have total control of how you apply contrast to a photograph, you're going to need to do this manually, which leads us to the second method, which is by using the tone sliders. So specifically, we're going to be looking at the highlights, the shadows, the whites, and the black slider, whereas the contrast slider modifies the highlights and the shadows at the same time. By using the tone sliders, we get to isolate exactly where we're making our changes. So as the name suggests, you can increase or decrease the brightness of each one of those 4 categories without affecting the others. This gives you much more control compared to the contrast slider because you can adjust the brightness levels of specific parts of the photograph. For example, in this photograph, if I wanted to adjust the contrast of the sky, say, I could use the highlight slider to bring down the brightness because the sky is the brightest part of this photograph. Once I've dialed that in, I could work on the different parts of the photograph, such as the shadows, without having to worry about the highlights. So this method divides the photograph into 4 different values, your highlights, your whites, your shadows, and your blacks. So you have these 4 categories or areas that you can adjust individually. But what if you need more granular control? Well, in that case, let's jump into the third method of controlling contrast, which is using the tone curve. The tone curve is often misunderstood amongst beginner photographers. But once you get the concept, you'll see that it's not really that difficult to understand. Whereas the tone sliders that I just showed you give you 4 different areas that you can individually control, the tone curve lets you have as many of those areas as you want. For example, you could divide the photograph into 8 different brightness levels, and you could adjust each one of those individually. So let me show you how that works. But before we do that, if you are enjoying this video and you'd like to support me, please make sure that you click the like button. It makes a huge difference to me and to the channel. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, consider doing so. I make videos like this every week to help you with your photography. So if you don't want to miss out on any of them, make sure that you click the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you'll know when I upload a new video. Okay, so the tone curve can be a little bit confusing. So let me try and see if I can simplify it for you. You've got this thing that looks like a graph. And all you need to know here is that the left side of the horizontal axis represents the darkest sections of the photograph, and the right hand side represents the brightest sections of a photograph. And then you've got your vertical axis, so this one here, and this represents exactly how much brightness is in those sections. It's all going to make sense in a second. What we need to look at is this horizontal line that you've got here, and this represents how much brightness or what the brightness level is for each one of those parts of the photograph. Let's use an example so that it all comes together and you understand what I'm talking about. So let's click somewhere in the middle of this photograph, or of the line of this photograph in the curve. So when we click in the middle of the line, you're essentially selecting the mid-tones, okay? So the center part, where it's neither brightness or a bright area or a darker area, it's in the middle, referred to as the mid-tones. When we click in there, we get this little marker that gets put in there. All you got to do now is, if you click and hold that marker and you lift it up, okay, or you drag it down, you're either going to increase the brightness level, so the exposure of that section, or you're going to decrease it, depending on which way, whether you go up or down. So if you understand this, you'll get curves. So let's put this back in the middle, okay? And we're going to leave that marker there so we can lock that in there, so that we want that to remain in the middle. And now we are going to choose some area which is probably going to be around the brighter parts of the photograph. So we're going to use the top right hand part of this line. That's what this line represents. The higher you go up up the line to the right, the brighter part of the photograph you're affecting. So we're not going to go right up to the highlights. We're going to go somewhere around the middle of that, and between the midtones and the complete highlights. And we're going to click in there and add another marker in there. And now we're going to increase the marker. We're going to lift it up a little bit so that we're increasing the exposure of just that part of the photograph. Notice that it's not affecting anything else. None of the darker areas of the photograph. It's only affecting the brighter parts. And we're going to do the complete opposite now and add a marker to the shadow sections, so the darker parts of the photograph. And we're going to bring that down just a little bit. And what you've done essentially is created your own contrast curve, okay? And this is a fairly simple one. This is often referred to as an S curve because it sort of resembles a little bit of an S. It's a very simple way to add contrast to your photographs. But this is the simplest example that I can show you. You can go and add more dots, more of these markers, and really fine tune exactly where you want the brightness to increase or decrease. And the beauty of doing it this way is that you can add as many markers as you want. I think you get up to 255. So it really gives you total control to be able to really dial in the contrast in specific parts of the photograph. And so this is probably my most preferred way of working on photographs, because it just gives you total control. All the other methods are really, really good. And if you're in a hurry, then I will use those ones. But if I've got time, this is what I'm going to use. And once you understand curves, I think it'll really change your life, because curves, you can then carry that info or that knowledge into Photoshop, and you can use curves to adjust all sorts of other things. I'm showing you contrasting here, but you can do it with specific colors and all sorts of other stuff that I think it's just going to be really useful if you just play around and get your head around how these curves work. But I think hopefully I've explained it to you in a way that you understand. Of course, if you don't understand it, you've got any questions, just leave them in the comment section, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. So that's it for this video. I hope it was helpful and you were able to follow along. But if you do have any questions, make sure that you leave them in the comment section below. Or reach out to me through any of the usual social media platforms. You're going to find all the links to those in the description. Again, please don't forget to like the video. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.